Welcome everybody, good afternoon to you. My name's Bill Mason. I'm the chair of the Continuous Cover Forestry Group, speaking to you from the basement in Edinburgh. And welcome to another in our session of CCF Continuous Cover Forestry related webinars. Just a few words about David, who I'm very pleased to have with us today. David works for the Forestry Commission as an area deer officer, provides advice on deer management, particularly in the eastern part of England, where I've encountered him in the past, and he provided me and my family with some useful advice about a decade ago. He's studied game management at Sparsholt in Hampshire, and after completing his course in the early 90s, he worked for the Commission as a wildlife ranger in Thetford Forest. And since about 2003, he's had a number of roles relating to deer management, and he's got considerable expertise in this area. And we're really pleased to have David to talk today about deer management in relation to CCF. Because if you go to any continuous cover forestry related meeting, whether it's in Britain or on the continent, deer management crops up fairly soon in the discussion. So David, you're very welcome. Look forward to your presentation.
Bill, thank you very much for a lovely introduction, and thank you for the very much jog of my memory that I did see you in your woods on a snowy winter's day. Yeah, as I say, almost a decade ago with the Deer Initiative. I'm very pleased that it was a positive meeting and that you've been invited. You've actually invited me back again. So thank you, Bill. Must have worked. Good. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much also to the group for coming along this afternoon and sort of partaking in this seminar with me. Very free to answer questions at the end, like Bill has said, and also just mention that I am on the end of the telephone and emails if anyone wants anything further, sort of post transcript. Good. So this is a fallow deer in a nice bit of larch woodland with some bluebells, ancient semi-natural woodland over in Herefordshire. Photographs today are taken from a variety of places around the country, and based on my experiences really of what I see when I'm out there working with the sector, and that sector can be very broad. It can be people like the Wildlife Trust, National Trust, Woodland Trust, Royal Forestry Society, National Farmers Union, CLA, and private sector individuals. So it's a very broad remit that we work under. And the aim really is to support the landowners with managing their land, woodland predominated, but also looking at the wider landscapes as well, and how deer affect their land management objectives. And it's always crucial, isn't it, to work with the landowners on what they want to achieve and tailor our advice to meet that objective. So I just thought we ought to really start with a little bit of history, oughtn't we? We've all done history at school, and this starts just post-Ice Age. We have to remember that red deer and roe deer are our two native deer species in the country. They were here post-Ice Age, and they've been here on and off ever since. So in the Norman period, the fallow deer were introduced. It was a food product, really, more than anything else. They wanted them for their parks and for food. But by the late Middle Ages, there were pretty much no deer about. It was amazing, really, to think that during a long lean period, there was very few deer around until about 1800. When people started to reintroduce the fallow deer back into parklands and enclosures. So you have sort of the landscape changes, doesn't it, as our landscape management options change and we find different species within it. In the 1900s, bearing in mind, remember that red deer, roe deer are native, fallow deer were introduced. We then had the introduction of muntjac, Chinese water deer and sika deer. And I think most of us will appreciate some of the challenges that we now have with those. But of course, in the early days, deer was seen as just another creature in the landscape. It wasn't until 1950 that Bill was around, and he became one of the first wildlife managers within Forestry England, well, Forestry Commission at that stage. And there was some form of deer policies being developed. 1952 Deer Act, followed by the Deer Act in 1963, laid down the legislation in which deer could be managed. These are obviously making sure that animal welfare are maintained and that we're not debilitating the deer herd too much. And of course, it's making sure that things are done correctly. Since the war, things have changed dramatically. A lot of the parkland enclosures that we had pre-1940s fell into disrepair. There was obviously a food shortage in the country, so there was food production was absolutely crucial. And we're looking at a situation at that time when there weren't that many deer out and about beyond the fences, but there were fallow deer being released from a lot of the parks at that stage as well. So we're sort of in that interluding period where things weren't too bad, and that's when things could get worse. So where are we today? Well, it's 2020, 2022, and we have seen dramatic population rises of all 6 species. So we now have free-ranging red roe, our native species, the fallow deer, honorary native, seeker deer, Chinese water deer, and muntjac, extending their range and number across the country. And that range expansion and number increase has been taken alongside our day-to-day management of the countryside. And it's really important to sort of understand that as populations increase, their impacts can increase at the same time. Why has there been this increase? Well, we have to sort of understand what deer management is about. What I've been involved with for the last 30 years is managing deer to a low level to protect the forest crop. In the case when I was wildlife rangering here at Thetford, we're here to reduce that deer population, maintain low numbers to allow that crop to establish. Other parts of the private sector and across our landscapes had different objectives. Obviously, we don't have any top predators, so we are the only controlling influence of the deer population. But if you're into deer stalking as a recreational hobby, you may well want deer on the ground. You may well want to go and see deer to go and cull. If you've got a business that involves client stalking, you're bringing in clients to cull deer for you or on the property you're managing. And to do that, you need what I class as a bit of a target-rich environment. If you're paying to go and do something, you want to see that product. And that often conflicts with our day-to-day land management objectives of arable crop production or timber production. We've had a huge increase in winter cereals being planted, winter crops in the ground through that lean period, November through to March. That has had the benefit of being able to feed deer through the winter, but we've also seen during that time massive increases in agricultural impact. The cattle trailer there with the Land Rover in front of it, that sort of indicates that deer have been moved around our countryside as well. We're not allowed to move muntjac anymore, but at times people have done in the past, and that's another reason that deer have increased their range, that sort of human movement. Deer have appeared in Ireland now. They didn't get there by swimming across the Irish Sea. They're now in Belgium, and again, they didn't cross the North Sea swimming. They were taken there because people wanted to see these animals in a new environment, and that's been happening across the country for many decades now. So where's the evidence that deer are having an impact? Well, there's a number of reports that have been written over the last 15 or 20 years. And these things such as the State of Nature report, invasive non-native species, pests and pathogens, UK bird populations, DEFRA reports, impacts of deer on lowland invertebrates reviews, University of East Anglia reviews, and a host of other reports have shown that increasing deer populations have an effect on the environment in which they live. At low numbers, that benefit can actually be positive, but as they creep into moderate and high numbers, that impact is normally negative. And of course, what we do have is a population of deer that is living alongside other deer species as well. So in many parts of the country, we have at least 2, if not 3, if not 4 deer species present. In bits of land I go to in East Anglia, we've often got 5 species of deer now present. And that obviously has a big bearing on how the deer are influencing that structure of the habitat. We have to remember that deer are browsers, and we'll go on to that in a minute, but they are selective browsers, particularly the small species. The larger species are heavier grazers, so they can have a detrimental effect on a whole range of plant species within our woodlands, and that has a knock-on effect to other species, fauna within the landscape as well. In terms of what goes on in the future, I thought I really ought to just mention that some of the things that are going on. So we've got the 25-year environment plan, which I guess most of you will have heard about. It's all to do with carbon, water, air, flooding, etc. Within that, we have a driver for planting trees in England, across GB, actually, to be fair, but we're focusing very much on England at the moment. I guess the group is England, Scotland, Wales based. So we're talking about trees in our wider landscape, and these are new trees, new planting programs. We have nature recovery networks. We have farm facilitation groups, cluster groups, and these are groups that are working in partnership across landscape ranges to try and develop nature recovery. We have environmental land management, our next scheme that will take over from countryside stewardship in the next 48 months or so. There's a lot of work going on in the background about that scheme and how that will benefit and support landowners with managing their land to support the 25-year environment plan. We do have quite a bit of work to do with that. We've been working very hard alongside our DEFRA colleagues to make sure that deer are featuring within it and that deer incentives are taken from countryside stewardship WD2, the woodland improvement element, and taken into that local nature recovery element of the ELM scheme. And the crux of it all really is to try and provide habitats that are good for a wide variety of objectives. And that could be your trees, your shrubs, but it's also the associated fauna and flora that live within our woodland areas, and of course our wider landscapes. So the bearing of this is supposed to be continuous cover forestry, but in many respects, a lot of the conversations we'll have over the next 20 minutes or so are about deer and all types of habitats. So you can translate this into a normal normal woodland system. That'd be about slightly unfair, wouldn't it? A more historic woodland system, a clear fell system, or it could be wider landscapes. And we do have to remember that deer are whole landscape features. They are not just woodland animals. And in the past, a lot of the grants and incentives were tailored at deer in woodland. We need to try and focus deer in our whole landscape situations and structures. Just as a bit of an overview, deer of all species are here to stay. There is no eradication policy on them. We have to learn to live with them. The deer range is likely to continue to spread. And potentially, if we don't do something quite radical, the numbers will continue to increase. Over the last 50 years, so in the early 1970s, the population was estimated at about 450,000 deer across the UK. In the 1990s, when I started culling, we were estimating 1 million. Today, we're estimating over 2 million. So that's with all the deer control that's been going on in the past, the population is increasing quite rapidly. And to me, that's concerning because we really have to change the whole way we operate within the deer management world to actually make a difference. Even just to hold that deer population at its current level, we need to be culling in excess of 600,000, 700,000 deer a year. And we're probably about 2/3 of the way there at the moment. So we need to think about adaptive management. We need to think about what our land management objectives are. That's that little green circle in the top right-hand corner of this slide. Land objectives and the scale. So if you've got large scale plantations, large scale woodlands, they're going to be more likely able to hold and sustain a small population of deer with less impact on your objectives. If you've got small scale woodlands or scattered woodlands, small scattered woodlands across a wider landscape like we have in parts of Suffolk. In Suffolk, we have 6% woodland cover. Now, that's not very high, and those woodlands that are around are only between 5 and probably 15 or 20 hectares. So any number of deer in those environments is going to have quite a significant effect. And if you translate that into a larger woodland area where you may be managing compartments within it, if you do a coppice coop or if you do a sort of regenerative thin, you will find large scale impact in some of those areas if you have too many deer. So we need to think about our landscape objectives. And then we need to start thinking about the deer themselves and how they impact on our landscape. We'll talk about population densities in a little while, but do we really need to know how many deer there are? To my mind, no, we don't. We need to know the species distribution, yes. We need to know something about the natural environment and how that affects annual recruitment, the survival, growth, and reproduction rates of our deer. But actually, what I'm really interested in is what impact those animals are having on your objectives. If you've got objectives that require natural regeneration to occur, or you want to replant in certain areas or add trees in at certain times of the rotation, those trees need to be able to grow. And it's not sustainable whether you're doing continuous cover forestry, normal woodland management, or woodland creation to continue to stick fences in everywhere and default almost to the fence or tube situation like we seem to be at the moment. We need to think how much deer eat each day, because this is going to be surplus to what's in your woodland and above your woodland objective. So a fallow deer will be eating about 5 kilos of food a day, which means that 100 fallow will be eating 182 tons or so per year. 100 fallow is equivalent to about 15 cattle or 100 sheep. Now that gives you some context and thought process, I would hope, to think that actually I wouldn't let my sheep into my woodland. If you're not letting your sheep into a woodland to graze it, you shouldn't be letting your fallow deer into it either, or allowing muntjac populations to build up and establish themselves and continually browse selectively that understory. So how much food is available within your woodlands or within the landscape? And that landscape will depend upon where you are in the country. We do have to think about what's going on outside our woodlands to ensure that our woodlands themselves are managed correctly in terms of the deer management. So here we've got trees, woodlands, trees, hedgerows, and arable crops. And that's a sort of situation where we get a lot of England. We've got the food, how much do they need to eat, and will our objectives be established with our current deer population? So we carry out something called habitat impact assessments. And this is looking at woodlands and looking at how the deer are affecting that structure. We move into the woodland, we walk through it, looking at the browse levels, where they're nipping those little tender shoots off and affecting and changing our woodland structure. And deer will change that structure by preferentially browsing certain species at low numbers. So they will be taking out the more delicate plants, or plants that are tastier to them, moving on to the less palatable species as time moves on, as densities rise. If you think about that previous photograph, looking at dense understory, you've got some light, okay, appreciated, well, it may well be ash and that's dying out now. But we do have situations where deer are having small or little effect on our woodland structure. These areas are getting smaller and smaller. As deer numbers increase, we start to see that understory being taken out. And then after a number of years, we start to see a whole change in how our woodland looks. And we're going to a number of woodlands that look like this now, each and every week, each and every year, where those deer have been browsing at high densities for a number of years. And in this situation, it's probably 30 years of continual browsing. That's changed how that woodland looks. It's not good for regeneration, it's not good for timber production, and it's definitely not good for natural environment. This sort of situation happens when deer become totally out of control. And this is a video that we took with a drone up in Rockingham Forest a few years ago now. And these animals are living on this area purely because no one is culling on this ground. These fields amount to about 300 acres. But as you can see, these animals have grazed that landscape to within an inch of its life. And then they move out onto the farm crops. And the adjoining landowners are receiving significant impacts each and every year, totaling 150, 200,000 pounds worth of crop damage every year. But those animals are then moving into the surrounding woodlands at night quite often and browsing those woodlands out, which makes woodland management around these non-management areas really difficult. And that's when we have to start thinking about applying to Natural England for night shooting licenses, going out after dark, using thermal imaging equipment to find the animals, and then using spotlights to cull them. Sounds unpalatable, it's not sport, it's hard work. But these are the situations which are sort of the extreme end of management. In a lot of areas, we're finding that deer populations are at moderate levels of muntjac, fallow, some areas with roe and some areas with red deer. It can be managed quite effectively during daylight hours, but because people don't have the time and energy to go into it, populations continue to increase. With the research and evidence base to justify culling, we need to quite often work with organisations that maybe find deer management slightly unpalatable, don't want to be carrying it out. But by providing evidence on the effect of the browsing, the majority of organisations I've worked with over the last 30 years undertake culling to some degree or other to protect their investment in time and woodland and money. This evidence base is crucial when you're justifying why we are managing deer populations. This is as happens as a coppice area taken in the south of England. Initially at coppicing stage, only the bit in the middle was fenced because they wanted to see what was happening. What they hadn't quite appreciated was the browsing pressure on their site, and they lost the coppice growth. This is an extreme example perhaps, but as numbers build up, if we don't actually take the deer management situation seriously, this is where we get to within all our woodlands. I've touched on preferential browsing. Obviously, there's a great big list of species of trees that we are encouraging now across our landscapes. We've got tree disease and various pathogens that are affecting how trees grow. So we need to be more creative about what trees we want to encourage within our woodland areas. Some are very palatable, others less so. In this sort of environment, we have to think about, again, how much food there is available for the deer. So even the non-preferential trees here will be being browsed quite heavily because of the fact there is little food for them within the woodland structure. And these animals will be moving around the woodland on a regular basis daily, picking out the best bits of our woodland. Multi-aged, multi-regeneration within our species is what we're really after. And here, the last two slides show that sort of more dense understory and structure that we want to see developing. This is Jamie Caudry, who's my colleague in the south of England. We're looking at sort of the height at which deer browse and trying to identify species presence, because that's really important to understand the height at which deer browse. This is outside of woodland in Suffolk. We've got some hornbeam regeneration occurring outside the woodland where there's lots of light. Within the woodland area, there's very little regeneration occurring. This woodland does have muntjac, roe, fallow, red, and Chinese water deer present within it, and the management there is really tricky. So really, we need to think about a number of protections efforts. There's some little, I can't quite remember what these blue things are called, unfortunately. At some stage, it will probably come back to me. But put it on the growing tip, and it protects that tip from the browsing deer and allows it to grow up naturally. Tree guards of various types are being used regularly, and I don't know how many people are using those. But again, we need the right height for the deer species we've got. But really, we shouldn't be using these at all. We need to be managing our deer to a level whereby we can get regeneration or planted trees to grow naturally. Last resort, really, for me, is fencing. It's something that we default to on a regular basis. These are Harris panel fences around regeneration within a Suffolk woodland, where we're trying to sort of restructure it and allow natural regeneration processes to occur. Again, relatively high deer densities in the surrounding landscapes, which keep feeding back as the local stalkers are culling. One of you, two of you may have came across Trico recently. It's a sheep wool oil, sheep fat oil. They mix it up with various compounds, and it does help deter deer. And I think that a number of states will start to use this now. It's been licensed in the UK for a few years now, and a number of states are trialing it. You put it on the growing tip, and it does prevent the deer from browsing it. The other way of using it is by putting a sort of a ring fence around areas within your woodland, and it seems to help prevent deer from coming through those barriers. I was going to say it's a natural product. There's probably things in it that aren't as natural as you'd like, but certainly it's a compound that seems to be having a positive effect where it's being used alongside population control. And then we need the population control. We need deer stalkers on the ground who can undertake the management. The way things are structured at the moment is that it's very much recreationally based. It's volunteers who are going out working with the landowner as much as they can. And we have to remember that the deer management needs to be focused through our winter culling period. So 1st November through to the end of March in England are the times we can cull our female population. And they're the ones that recruit into the population each and every year. And we need to be thinking about the deer stalker qualifications, making sure they're experienced, making sure they're insured, making sure that you, as an owner, you trust them to go and do your cull for you. Deer management in the UK is safe. We've got some very experienced individuals out there, and we've got a number of younger people coming through who are now gaining experience to come and undertake the control. But if they're working full time, that restricts the winter culling to about 20 weekends a year. And the more ground people take on, the less effective they can be on each and every holding. As we always say, you can only be in one place at a time. And if you've got 3 or 4 properties to control the deer on, you are not going to get around them very often. You will need a deer stalking agreement of some sort. It can be very simple and straightforward, like this one that I've actually got for a bit of ground in Suffolk, or it can be a lot more complicated. And quite often, organisations and landowners want something a bit more thorough that stands up. I know these guys quite well. It's just a matter of making sure that I'm covered if I'm approached on the land by anyone who doesn't know the landowner. Then, of course, we need infrastructure. You need high seats. Not all the deer control can be undertaken on foot through our woodland areas. Some areas may not be safe to shoot off the ground. You may need a high seat to get the elevation to develop backstops. But whatever we have, we've got to have structures that are fit for purpose and are safe to use. There should be a warning sign on them saying, do not climb, not for unauthorized use. In theory now, we're meant to have the circle with the line through it so that people who either don't read English or are unable to read can also understand what the sign says. So the caution do not climb on its own sign it shouldn't be used now. It should be the other sign. These structures have to be in the right place, and they have to have sight lines developed from them to ensure you can actually be effective from the seats that are being put up.
David, you've got about 5 minutes.
Lovely, thank you. And these sight lines don't necessarily have to be massive, great rides. Have them on your ride structure, and then have small little sight lines into them where you've trimmed overhead branches so you can see into the compartment blocks and see the deer moving naturally through the woodland. And then we need extraction equipment. Some areas are very wet, very boggy. You may need to use different sorts of vehicles, but a lot of woodlands, we cannot get four-wheel drive vehicles into them. So we've resorted to using quad bikes a lot. And you get these into areas where perhaps a number of people wouldn't be culling because they can't extract and drag those animals far enough. The age demographics of a lot of our deer stalkers are also getting quite old. And even the team I work with, probably 3 of them are over 70 years old now, definitely over 65. The little lad on the left-hand side there, he's my son, and he's just starting to learn the process. So he's quite useful now. He's young and fit. The gentleman on the right, I've known for nearly 30 years. He was young and fit. He's now getting older, and he needs help getting in and out of the high seats. So this is sort of the problems we have with access. You then need some form of place to take your dead deer. We can't leave them out in the woodlands. We don't want to be shooting to waste. We need premises that are suitable. This is a chiller on one of the estates in Suffolk. It's in a barn. It's got a chiller bit on the back, the bit photograph on the right. Then you've got a preparation room in the front. There's a bench, and then obviously hot and cold water. These are the sort of things that need to be registered with local authority if you're going to be selling on to an approved game handling establishment, the old game dealers. You need to be registered, and the stalker who's been culling those deer also needs to be in a position where he's got a large game handling certificate, which means that he's assessed that animal to say it's fit for consumption. So we're supporting the British Wild Venison market. I chair the British Wild Venison Working Group. It's a national group. We're developing a standard for venison production, very similar to Scottish Quality Wild Venison, to run alongside that scheme, but working in England predominantly, but working hopefully with some of the processes in Scotland so they can take English venison into Scotland, process it, and then sell it back as a certified product. So it will be British Wild Venison working with Grown in Britain to develop that. And the quality meat that we're producing is food. We have to think of deer management as producing food. And every time we're assessing our deer population, we need to make sure that it's fit and healthy. And currently it is. We've got very few problems or issues with it. And the venison we're producing is high quality, and there is a good market for it. It's just linking the supply chain from the producer, the deer stalker, the estates, and the game dealers with that end user. So the more support we get for that, the better it will be. And that's me done. Thank you, Bill. I think that this is a view in Suffolk. 111 deer in that fallow deer in that herd. Not quite as many as in the video we had up in Rockingham, but significant nonetheless.
Okay. Thank you, David. Thanks very much. Thanks for sticking to time. There's quite a number of questions come in the chat. And there's sort of some more general ones and also ones to do with the particulars of deer management. I'm going to start with one of the first ones, which is the question of diversification of species. And you mentioned this, the phrase you used was preferential browsing. And that links, I suppose, to questions of regeneration within CCF. Now, there are two aspects, I think, to the question. One is, do you think it's feasible to diversify species or structure with regeneration or through planting if you haven't already brought the deer population under control? Is there a kind of chicken and egg here?
Okay. I would always be encouraging people to think about preemptive culling before undertaking management work. I think that you can develop your woodland management plans, however they may be, but the very first thing you need to be thinking about is getting that deer control in place. So preemptive culling is crucial as far as you can. If you're thinking about immediately starting to diversify that structure with a deer population present, I think you need to be thinking about undertaking rigorous control alongside and appreciating that you will lose certain species if they are palatable. And of course, it depends on your deer population and density to start with, doesn't it? But if you've got high impacts to start with, I'd almost be at a point saying, don't even start your woodland management work until your deer population is back under control.
Okay, thanks. And do you have, just as a supplementary to that, do you have a feel for how long you need to be undertaking that preemptive management before you start undertaking the diversification measures?
Okay, so that's going to depend upon the deer species you've got present in the area and the vacuum effect that you create by culling. So there was a small 35 hectare woodland or so in Essex that had effective control in, but because of the sort of the vacuum effect that we developed, it took nearly 10 years to get that woodland back into favourable condition. And that was a sort of a triple SI woodland. I think that if you've got a large woodland and a species of deer that is maybe a roe muntjac, you should be able to do it much quicker than that. It's where we have the herding species that we have more problems. The more pressure you put on the fallow deer, or the red deer for that matter, they'll move off into other areas and then come back raiding at night. And that can have quite an effect on you. It also depends upon how much other deer control is going on in the surrounding landscape. So it's a bit of a tricky question. You need to look at a lot of the situations locally and work out what's best. But you're going to be looking at 3 years as a minimum.
Okay, thanks. Now, there's a lot of questions which I've probably not managed to do justice to, so apologies to the audience. One that has cropped up a few times in other webinars. Interested to hear about lessons we can learn from our continental neighbours, where they seem to have more success in obtaining natural regeneration. An example quoted from Germany, stalkers being fined if they don't achieve adequate damage control.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have thoughts about this?
Okay. Yes, I think, again, we need to look at scale and we need to think about the species present. I think the fine system is something that could work, but really it's about landowners and managers taking ownership of the deer problem. If you've got a deer problem and you've got deer stalkers in place, are you paying them to do a job, or are they paying you for the privilege of going out and culling animals? We need to look at the models of deer management in the UK, and a lot of them are around the voluntary sector. And yes, there are voluntary sectors in Europe, but the scale is slightly different, both in terms of landscape, but also in terms of colours, I guess. And the way they operate is different. A lot of them are doing driven stalking and driven shooting. We're not doing that here. We operate on a stalking basis where we're walking around quietly or using high seats. So the methods are slightly different, but really it's up to the landowners to say, guys, if I want you to manage that deer population, how are you going to do it? Can you be effective in the time you've got? We need to professionalize the industry. I think there is more room for professional deer stalkers where they are paid by landowners to go and do the job, and probably have a number of deer stalker helpers who are volunteers or recreationally based who help them. So you have a guy who is a professional stalker, and then he has other people helping him to deliver culls at landscape levels.
Okay.
We've never paid stalkers before. The Forestry Commission have got 50 or 60 deer stalkers as wildlife rangers, but outside that, there are probably 80% of the deer are culled by recreational volunteers.
Okay.
And you're right, Liam, it was a professional guide, not a professional deer manager. Yeah, there's a distinct difference between those two. Absolutely.
Okay, there's a question about the use of thermal drone surveys. Questioner has a herd of sika deer, and they carried out a thermal drone survey to generate a figure of the number of deer per square kilometre. Do you think this is a useful model to be used in large blocks of woodland? And this perennial question, is there a target population density that one should be aiming for?
Okay, the target population density, if you go to Caledonian pine forest, they're looking at about 5 red deer per square kilometre or less. In England, we don't look at densities very often because we can't count enough of the deer to get an accurate deer density. I think we'll develop it, but it's going to be very much dependent upon what your objective is as a landowner. And if you've got too many impacts, you've got too many deer. It's fairly straightforward. Don't overcomplicate it. And some of the science does overcomplicate it. It takes us away from our basics. In terms of drone surveying and using thermal videos on drones, yes, I think that's going to be a massive development. We've worked with a chap called Ben Harrower over the last 6 months doing some drone survey work in Lincolnshire and up at Cannock Forest, and he's done 2 or 3 others, which names escape me recently, but it's really is revolutionizing how we count deer. And although I'm very much impact driven, if we know how many deer we've got, you can do your population recruitment modeling and work out how many you need to cull each year to get to a set point. That set point can then reflect on your impact surveys. And once your impact surveys are at acceptable levels, you can then say, well, if with this many deer, those impacts are correct, how do we maintain that population at that level? So I think there is mileage in it. You need to do the whole landscape area. And we're actually in the process of starting to develop a project in South Lincolnshire at the moment, covering over 400 square miles for drone surveying work for the next 3 years, based alongside impact survey work to do just that, to try and work out modelling of how effective it can be and what the costs will be. Because obviously there's a cost to everything.
There's a question come in about CCF's impact on deer management, which you might like to address. A comment I was told a few years back was one of the differences if you switch to CCF was instead of concentrating your management upon the restock areas or the planted areas as you would in conventional management, if you moved to CCF, you had to manage the deer across the whole woodland area. And you had to then make sure that the stalkers could work the whole woodland area. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, no, I don't
Good.
think. No, because I think that you need to be managing deer, even if you're doing a clear fell coppicing type system or replanting system, you need to be culling the deer across the woodland landscape area to protect that investment. Those managed areas will often be quite small, and deer from surrounding areas will come into that area to feed. So you don't just have your protection or your culling pressure on those bits, you have them on the wider landscape to protect all your interests. Because quite often the structural change by deer across that wider landscape, not just those managed areas, will be quite important as well. So I think what CCF gives you is potentially a denser habitat, but also it gives you the opportunity to potentially feed a few more deer than you would in a conventional system, because you can actually hold deer numbers at a slightly different level.
Okay. Question just come in. Gentleman has a small wood and knows nothing about deer. How would he begin to get help to survey the wood for deer numbers and impact?
Give me a ring.
Okay. Your phone will be busy then.
Yeah, seriously. We do run occasional training days, either in conjunction with Small Woods Association or directly with ourselves on deer impact surveying, and that's for impact and activity. We've also carry out best practice events with some of our shooting organisation colleagues on best practice of deer management. So deer management planning about how you're going to achieve it, what you need to be putting in place to get best effect. I'd be more than happy to do those directly with yourselves if you get small groups either on site using a village hall and a woodland, or over something like this, although something like this probably isn't quite as good as going out on site and actually showing and pointing and looking. But there are methods available, and we're more than happy to develop groups who can help and provide help to those groups.
Okay, and presumably if the gentleman was out with England, you could put him in contact with the relevant colleagues north or west of the border.
Absolutely, yeah. Yep.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to go back. Apologies to everyone. There was a question that we skimmed over. I've tried not to drag David too much into the politics, but there was a statement you made sort of fairly early on. I'm trying to find it now. If we don't do something quite radical about managing, I think you were referring to controlling the expansion in deer numbers. Is this radical initiative that you're envisaging, is this more to do with practice, or does it also have implications on legislation and things like closed seasons? And you may not, I realize you may be asking you to speculate beyond where you want to go.
Yeah, we need to, as a sector, understand how we've got to where we are now, and I've sort of alluded to that in the last half hour or so, about underculling the correct species and sexes. So we've been underculling the females and allow this population to develop. If we're going to make a change, we need to be changing the whole way we operate. And I suppose radical could be a little bit too radical, but maybe, yes, we do need to be thinking about closed seasons, extending the doe season, and allowing culling to occur in the closed season, perhaps, rather than extending the doe season. So having more flexibility in that April period when you can cull does quite effectively without causing any animal welfare issue where they're causing damage to crop or property. We've got Section 7 which allows us to do that, but a lot of stalkers don't want to use it, and a lot of landowners don't want to use it because of the fear of being investigated by others who may disagree with your culling process. So we need to relax that and understand how that operates and get Natural England to develop a system where certain stalkers can, maybe in certain areas, develop those techniques more freely without any issues. Night licensing is fairly straightforward at the moment. We've worked very closely with Natural England over the last 10 years of developing policy on that. And where there is a requirement, they are happy to allow night licensing to occur. But that can only occur in the closed season at the moment. But also, I think landowners themselves need to sort of sit up and take ownership of this. The number of places I go to where the owner or the manager says, well, we've got a man that does. We've got a deer stalker out there who does a bit. Well, that doing a bit has led to a population now of over 2 million deer in the UK. And if we're going to change that, we need to be culling almost double what we're culling at the moment to make any difference at all. So I think that is quite radical, that landowners are going to have to pay deer stalkers to go and do the job if they want the job to be done properly, like you would for any other operation in your woodland. You wouldn't dream of getting a contractor in with his machine or a hand fella in and not pay him, would you? I mean, it's one of those sort of situations where deer stalking, because people are happy to pay to go and do it with you, you'll take the money and accept a half-done job.
But that's raised a question that I had in the back of my mind when you were talking. Apologies for putting one of my own. There's been a lot of discussion in the sector, as I'm sure people know, about a skills shortage on the professional forestry side. What you're in effect, I think, saying is that there's a looming skills shortage on the wildlife, the deer management side. And possibly people are less aware of that than they are of the professional forester skills.
Yeah, yeah, potentially, but I think there's also a lot of people out there who could, if they were being paid to go and do it as part of a job, upskill and deliver the outcomes that we're asking them to deliver. So at the moment, there's a lot of gamekeepers out there who are doing game shooting. They are very capable of using rifles. They are also capable of culling deer because they've quite often done the deer stalking certificates level 1 or level 2. So I think there is a resource out there. It needs to be developed. Obviously, we need a lot more youngsters coming in to do the job, but they will only come into the paid professional side if there are jobs for them to come to. And at the moment, there are not any jobs for them to come to, or very many jobs for them to come to, because people, landowners, are not paying them for the service they're delivering.
Okay, there was a question I thought was quite interesting, which related to grant schemes and the possibility that funding could be directed away from fencing and the use of tubes towards funding paid stalkers with targets. And do you think that would be an effective mechanism?
Yes, I do. And the Forestry Commission in the woodland improvement areas of countryside stewardship have brought in deer stalking payments this year. So WD2 is a woodland improvement element. Woodland Supplement 1 is an additional payment for deer stalking. And we hope that landowners will be passing some of that money onto the deer stalkers for them to deliver the job. It's one of those things, isn't it, that over the years, the grant schemes have come and gone and they change. What we need is continuity of a system that works. So through the Forestry Commission, we are developing that, and it's £90 a hectare for those areas of WD2 that are eligible, and it's from this year. So those people who applied this year, hopefully you got your WD2 in, hopefully you got your WS1 supplements applied for. You cannot, though, retrospectively fit it to existing WD2 CS agreements. The next stage, of course, I suppose, sorry, Bill, is to get the deer management payments into the England Woodland Creation Offer, so that where people are creating new woodlands, they can also go and be paying stalkers to manage deer on the surrounding lands that affect that woodland creation site or on the woodland creation site itself. So again, we move away from this default position of fencing and tubes, and we go culling instead, or using some tree tubes and some fencing to support culling. And we need to get the deer management need emphasized through all levels of ELM. At the moment, it looks like it will be going into local nature recovery, all being well, directly from countryside stewardship straight in. But we need to be thinking and supporting landowners in getting deer management payments into the sustainable farming incentive as well, that lower level, so we get deer management payments into that that base payment section.
Okay, thanks. There were 2-3 questions I thought I'd try and take together. I hope the questioners will forgive me. One was to do with the question about moving deer. If you're operating a CCF system and you're fairly well developed, you might, as perhaps on the continent, be able to move the deer to a point where you can see them. Then there's a question of the closed seasons, and why do we have a closed season for males?
Okay, so the second question, we have a closed season for males because the Deer Act in the 1950s and 1960s was developed to support a sporting sector. So if you look at the closed seasons for male deer, they're predominantly when those antlers are growing, when they're in velvet. The open season is when those antlers are solid and hard and they have a value. So that's why we have a male closed season. Totally relevant today as far as I'm concerned, but that's how the Deer Act sits at the moment. In terms of moving deer, and I guess you mean by quietly walking through and moving deer to guns in high seats and things like that, deer will very quickly learn what's going on. So it's not a technique that works for long periods of time. Muntjac, you can't move through at all. We've tried it numerous times, and they just sit either very tight, or they will just walk around quietly behind you and disappear again. I find that, and I think sort of a number of us will probably agree, that collaborative culling is probably a better option. So you have a number of land ownerships with all their deer stalkers out, filling the areas where the deer will be going and moving through the different land ownerships and culling on a set morning each periodically through the doe season. And again, it's working together across a landscape, and that deer range herd that's important. So again, if you think back to sort of some of my slides where you've got woodland, scattered woodland and large herds of deer, those animals feed through a landscape naturally. They have their escape routes when disturbed. And if you can cull them as they're moving through that landscape on a set morning, moving from gun to gun, it can be quite effective. But again, you cannot do it very often. They learn and they'll disappear the wrong way.
Okay, thanks. There was a supplementary to that which related to, is there any reason why one can't cull to waste, so to speak?
There's nothing to stop anyone from culling to waste if that's what they want. But I think we have to remember that venison is a very high quality product, and there is a market for it, and we should be utilizing that product. If we think about this, of the public opinion on deer management, at the moment, we are very lucky that over the last 25 years, we've managed to bring the public with us on why we cull deer. Deer have a great aesthetic value. They're beautiful to look at. 2 of them are native, and the rest are sort of, they're here by default, but we are here living with them. And the public like to see them. And I don't think that the public support would last if we didn't base our culling on science and we utilize that product fully in the supply chain. I've just seen the one coming from Microtech Services about current price of £1 a kilo. Depends where you go. In the east of England, it has no marketable value unless you're a producer. I think that the processors, and we're working quite closely with a number of the large AGHEs now, they are looking at price increases. And we were in Suffolk, East Anglia, we were receiving about £2.50 a kilo for fallow just before Christmas, and £2 a kilo was retained right through until the end of April. A muntjac is worth about £5. So they are a significant problem, but that's where local processors, local stalkers, and local landowners have to start utilizing that product locally, and developing their own little chiller stores and selling it either in the skin or cutting it up under the right licenses from the local authority, and actually utilizing that local product. And most of us will find people locally who want a bit of muntjac or a piece of deer. It's about making sure that those systems and the processes are in place to allow them to do that.
Okay, now I'll take a question that slightly change of tack, but given my research background, you'll forgive me putting it in. Gentleman asks, what do you consider to be key research gaps when it comes to deer management? Is it monitoring impact assessments, or are there some social ecological areas of research that would be beneficial?
Oh, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because the more questions we ask, the more we need to know. And I think that there's obviously gaps around how many deer have we got, and at what level would a population be sustainable across the UK. I think that we don't want to overcomplicate it, but we do need to fill some of those gaps in terms of where these deer will move to, how much food are they eating from some of our forests. Also, what effect are they having on carbon? So where we've got high populations of deer, are they having an effect on the carbon sequestration of our woodlands? I had a conversation with Agritech last week about their carbon modelling for landowners, and we're looking at developing deer aspects of that within that as well, to sort of say, well, if they're stopping your natural regeneration and if they've removed the understory of our woodland, is there a carbon loss involved in that? How much carbon, methane are these animals producing each and every year themselves? What is the cost of deer in the UK to our natural environment, or to farmers' crops, or to deer vehicle collisions? So I think there's room on the carbon front, but there's also room on the economic impact that deer are having across our landscapes.
You know, there was a question I missed earlier, which may be of interest, which was, should or could local deer management groups develop, manage shared larders or processing areas so that stalkers can combine their outputs, so to speak?
I think there is future potential for that. Where we've been working in the past, there's been a lack of will from deer stalkers generally and landowners generally to share premises, and it's to do with economics and who's who in which farmyard at what time of night. And I think that you can develop a collaborative model, and there are one or two, but they're a bit few and far between. So I think we just need to look at the cluster groups, farm facilitation groups, and try and develop partnerships where there's already partnerships developing. And there's going to be a lot of these partnerships developing over the next 10 years, but we need to be in there now developing what we think people need. And what people need is premises that are fit for purpose. Chiller stores are local to people, so they're not driving 25 minutes, 35 minutes to get a muntjac into a chiller. They need those sort of facilities where they live or on the farm they're culling. And with the price of diesel increasing and the sort of costs involved in running machinery, I think that's going to become more and more crucial, because I think there's going to be less and less travel going on a sort of voluntary supplementary benefit for moving muntjac about, for instance.
Okay, we've gone 5, and the questions are slowly starting to tail down. I think we've managed to address most of them. If anybody feels that they've got a burning question that I've not managed to pick up in the discussion, then please, can you type it in now, and we'll take it in the closing minutes. I'm scrolling down frantically.
In terms of calling venison wild woodland beef or something, no, we're going to keep calling it venison. And I think sometimes we actually need to be saying what species of venison it is, because all deer taste slightly differently. For those people who eat deer on a regular basis, you can tell the difference. And I think there's quite a market now for developing muntjac as muntjac, or roe as roe, and fallow as fallow. That we shouldn't be lumping the whole thing as venison.
Can I ask a question which goes back to the sort of skills base and the sector? Do we have a handle at all about how many people are involved in culling deer across the country, or how many we might need? Are there any sort of statistics of that kind?
From memory, we've got in it about 24,000, I believe, level 1 holders. I'm not quite sure how many level 2 holders there are, but it would seem that the British Deer Society...
For the lay people, remind them what level 1 and level 2 is.
Okay, level. Sorry. So the deer stalking sector, through deer management qualifications, developed 2 levels of qualification, probably best part of 25 years ago now. And the level 1 is a predominantly theory-based, 3 days of lectures looking at deer anatomy and deer behavior and culling processes, followed by a day of assessment in terms of a little bit of range work, some questions on the deer side of management, and then some, historically it was food hygiene as well. That's been moved into level 2 now, actually. Deer stalking level 2 is a assessment of your stalking ability, carried out in front of an accredited witness who checks that you can stalk safely, you've got the right equipment, and you're operating in a safe and humane manner. Which is why if we're sort of advising landowners on who taking people on, ideally you need someone with level 1 who then moves on to get their level 2, but also with experience, because it's the experience of deer management that really sort of gets you into developing people's abilities. British Deer Site also run a slightly longer course on deer management as well, so a deer management advanced course.
Okay. Well, with people, forgive me, we're 5 minutes past the hour. There's been a flood of questions. I hope between us, David and I have managed to address most of them. As always, when deer management crops up in a CCF discussion, there's a lot of views and thoughts, but I think one of the things that's clear from David's presentation is that if we are going to manage deer to facilitate the development of CCF and regeneration, we've got to be a lot more professional in our approach as land managers to managing the deer. And it's not, I think the phrase David uses, not just a man who does some shooting now and again. We actually have to, as managers, owners, professional foresters, we have to be a lot more professional in our approach. So with that, I'd like to thank David very much for his presentation. I'd like to thank the audience for all your questions and your inputs. I'm sorry if I didn't manage to deal with all the questions. I hope we got most of them. And I should close by saying this will be the last of the CCFG webinars before the summer holidays, but we plan to start again in the autumn and to be running a program through the autumn and the coming winter. So wishing those of you present all the best for your holidays when you get them. And I'd like to thank David very much for his presentation and asking our questions so well. Thanks very much.